Shenel brought tea. They were seated at a simple table. The table looked sturdy and well used, just like the chairs and shelves around them. My sincere apologies for my rudeness to you, Shenel began. I had no idea you were a servant of the precious consort. Think nothing of it, Maomao replied. Shenel, like many of the palace women who did not serve directly in the Jade Pavilion, referred to Gyokao by her title. Maomao's upbringing wasn't particularly distinguished, unlike many of the palace women. She was, in essence, beyond her station at the palace. Shenel sounded calm and collected. There was no trace of the firm maternal tone she had adopted while swamped with laundry the day before. It was obvious now that she was a properly educated lady of the rear palace. Maomao thought she was sharp. Not every lady of the rear palace could even read and write. To have stayed here as long as Shenel appeared to have done, she must have been a woman with her wits about her. Otherwise, there had to be a special reason for keeping her around. At the moment, Shenel's expression was rather dark. Was it because she now knew Maomao was one of Consort Gyokao's ladies? Maomao was not pleased with the idea that she might be receiving special treatment. People often looked away when it came to the activities of the highest-ranking consorts and their ladies-in-waiting. However, Shenel had summoned Maomao here personally, a fact that seemed to make her almost as uncomfortable as Maomao. After a while, Shenel looked directly at Maomao and heaved a sigh. I have a favor I would like to ask you. Yes, ma'am. Shenel looked briefly taken aback by how nonchalant Maomao sounded. She quickly composed herself and said, I'm afraid it may sound somewhat forward. Do you mind? Go ahead, please. Maomao was more than used to being treated rudely. She was often as guilty of it as anyone she spoke with, or at least she thought she was. Because of this, she did not mind letting most things go. If I asked you to make a medicine for one of the ladies who serves the wise consort, then what? What? The response came from Yinghua, not Maomao. Yinghua slapped her hands on the table and leaned forward. The tea sloshed in the cups. A few drops spilled onto the table, leaving dark spots. Do you know what you are asking? Yinghua demanded. Shenel sighed again. Believe me, I am all too aware. She looked at Maomao. Maomao looked back, seeing that Shenel was serious. I presume you have a reason. Maomao, I'm sorry, but it can't hurt to hear what she has to say, can it? Yinghua sat back down, her eyebrows pinched together. She took a sip of her tea, which was cold by now, and appeared to be trying to pull herself together. Perhaps you'd be so kind as to tell me what's going on, Maomao said. Very well, Shenel replied and began to tell the story. This is getting out of hand, Yinghua said, uncharacteristically slumped over. You're not wrong, Maomao replied. She agreed with Yinghua that trouble was coming, but she could not ignore what she had just heard. One of the maids in the residence of the wise consort, Lihua, was very ill. The patient was at the Crystal Pavilion right now. This maid had often done her washing at the laundry area in the northern quarter, and she and Shenel had become acquainted. The maid had developed an unsettling cough some time ago, and Shenel had suggested she get some rest. It had been 5 days since then, and Shenel hadn't seen the woman. Perhaps she was doing her laundry somewhere else, or maybe the person in charge of the laundry had changed, Maomao suggested, but Shenel shook her head. Even if that is true, I would like her to come and get checked out at least once. So a cough, Maomao thought. According to Shenel, it had been an unusual cough. It had begun several days before the woman stopped showing up at the laundry area, but even before that, she had felt tired and had had a mild but persistent fever. Maomao asked if the maid had formally come to the clinic. Apparently she hadn't been able to get permission. It was a nasty place, Maomao thought. A simple maid probably wouldn't have asked Consort Lihua directly for permission to go to the clinic. She would have talked to one of the ladies in waiting, who most likely had ignored her. Considering the symptoms, Maomao wished they hadn't. Yinghua asked, You really think she is there? Maomao said, I firmly believe we need to look into it. If what Shenel had told her was true, they had to deal with the problem, and soon. Otherwise it could spread far beyond the Crystal Pavilion. Yinghua studied Maomao closely. She said, I know these sorts of things get your attention, but this is the Crystal Pavilion we are talking about. You need to wait until we can arrange a formal visit. You know that, right? You cannot go charging in there again, I know. Although Maomao had some acquaintance with Consort Lihua, she could not just go showing up at her residence. She had just made that mistake recently. She was desperate to go to the crystal pavilion the moment she could, but the stars were simply not aligned. She needed to be with Jinchi at least, or she would never get inside. Okay, freaking out would not help her at all. Maomao was trying to distract herself by thinking of something else when she noticed it. She hurried over to it, though she had to jump up and down several times before she could finally grab it. Maomao, what was I just saying? Yinghua cried, picking up the hem of her skirt and following her. Maomao frowned, feeling the object between her palms. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I saw something I have been looking for. What a bug, Yua, it is not a bug, and it was not a bug, but it also was not a body. That had gotten away, sadly. However, it had left Maomao with what she wanted. She could still feel it squirming in her hands. Look, she said. She opened her hands to reveal a lizard's tail still flouncing wildly. Lizard tails could fall off, but they could also grow back. That was the point. You cannot give up on anything. The moment you give up, it is all over. An immortal once said that. If you want to create a new medicine, first look into other things with similar effects. I want a medicine that makes things live and grow. Maomao was interested in lizards. She had thought they might eat the insects that gathered around the garden lanterns. I wanted to try to find out how and why the tail grows back, she said. She felt quite pleased, but no one responded. She looked over and saw that Yinghua had fallen clean over backwards. Her face was pale and her mouth was open. Maomao wrapped the tail in a handkerchief and tucked it into the folds of her robe. She had to look after Yinghua until she was feeling better. Chapter 11, Third Time's the Charm, Part 2. There was a general hubbub. People hurried to see what was happening. The elegant entrance hall was already crowded with palace women. Even maids stood there, looking stunned, with dustcloths still in their hands. They had completely forgotten they were wiping railings and window frames. A lady with drawn eyebrows asked, "And what, if I may ask, brings you here now?" She was looking directly at the one and only medical officer in the rear palace. This was most unusual. The doctor hardly ever left the medical office. It had been nearly a year since he had last been seen in the crystal pavilion. How could he show his face around here after the young prince died? He was now notorious for being a doctor in name only, otherwise incompetent. He had remained in this garden of women, unpunished, mainly because no one could replace him, and now here he was. What could he possibly want? The doctor carried a large bundle and a palace woman followed behind him. The woman was slim, almost emaciated. Her movements were efficient and precise. She wore a touch of bright red lip colour, and there was a dusting of pink on her cheeks. Had there been such a woman in the rear palace? They asked themselves this question. Wouldn't it be more typical for the eunuch doctor to be assisted by another eunuch? Perhaps they were wrong about that. There were 2,000 palace women here anyway. It wasn't that surprising if there were one or two they didn't recognize. Everyone else was busy whispering, so she had taken it upon herself to step forward. "Can we help you?" When they heard her speak, the other ladies immediately stopped chatting. The maids promptly returned to their tasks, although their dallying did not go unnoticed. She might not know every face in the rear palace, but she certainly knew every face here at the Crystal Pavilion. Her name was Shin, and that was her job. She had come with Lihua when Lihua had been chosen as consort, and had worked ever since to gain the emperor's affections. "We would like to see the wise consort, if we might," the doctor said. Shin narrowed her eyes. Wise consort was not an expression she wanted to hear from this man. She said, "My apologies, sir. I don't believe Lady Lihua wishes to see you." The doctor's face, with its sad excuse for a moustache, drooped at the polite but unambiguous refusal. His facial hair was truly pathetic. As a eunuch, he could no longer grow a moustache worthy of a man. He was as far from the emperor, with his glorious beard, as the clouds were from the dirt. The eunuch looked back with an expression of distress. The palace woman standing behind him whispered in his ear. She seemed very competent. The eunuch reached hesitantly into the folds of his robe and produced a piece of parchment paper. He said, "We have a letter." The parchment was covered in flowing script. It contained instructions allowing the doctor to enter the residence. The name at the end read Jinchi. Jinchi was the first person anyone in the rear palace would think of if you said the words gorgeous eunuch. He was so lovely that if he had been a woman, he could have brought the country to its knees, but he was not a woman. He was not a man. He was beautiful enough to make even Shin sigh, but unlike the other palace women, he evoked no more feelings than that for her. When she thought of why she had come to the rear palace, she knew she had no time to be distracted by eunuchs. Gaining the emperor's affections was vital, not just for herself, but also for her clan. This thought had been drilled into both her and Lihua since they were girls. Shin's mother was the older sister of Lihua's father. Shin and Lihua were the same age. Because of this, they had entered the rear palace together. Shin oversaw the crystal pavilion where they now lived. All the ladies in waiting of the crystal pavilion were the daughters of prominent families. Their blood was suitable to serve his majesty. Very well then. Shin didn't like it, but she knew when she was beaten. She decided to invite the visitors inside. She could have asked one of the other women to do it, but the doctor's arrival changed things. If the eunuch who oversaw the entire rear palace had sent him, that made a difference. It made her wonder what he wanted. The doctor usually only visited a consort's residence when she was feeling unwell, but Lihua had shown no sign of ill health. Shin was constantly at her side. She would have known if Lihua were sick. But today, just like every day, the consort had eaten breakfast with gusto. She was feeling fine. As Shin was puzzling over the meaning of this visit, she realized she no longer heard footsteps behind her. She glanced back to see that the doctor and his attendant had stopped. They were looking at a small building, something like a hut or shed, standing near the garden. Lihua's room was still far away, the innermost chamber on the uppermost floor of the pavilion. This was just one of the small outbuildings on the way there. Is something the matter? Shin inquired. Oh no, I was simply wondering what that little building was. It's just a storage shed. Shin was impatient to show them to the consort. Why were they wasting time asking about random buildings? The crystal pavilion had been built. When it appeared, it would be the home of the heir apparent. Was it so strange to have freestanding baths or storage buildings? Then there was the weird freckled girl who had come last year. She had built a bizarre thing next to the bath. She called it a sauna, but Shin didn't like it much. Lihua used it from time to time, though. Despite Shin telling them the shed was for ordinary storage, the palace woman the doctor had brought with him wouldn't stop staring at it. What did she find so interesting about it? A shrub bearing yellow flowers grew near its window, but that was the one distinguishing thing about the place. It was simply a storage building. They needed to keep moving. The palace woman tugged on the eunuch's sleeve, whispering in his ear once more. The eunuch frowned, then said to Shin, "Have you done anything different with this garden recently?" "No," Shin replied. "We leave it to the groundskeeper." I see. Then a wave of doubt caught Shin. Had those plants always been there? When had the gardener done that? The eunuch fell silent, but the palace woman nudged him again. He puffed out his cheeks. He was easy to read, but the palace woman's expression never shifted as she turned to Shin. Her dark eyes looked intently at the chief lady-in-waiting. The lady-in-waiting said nothing but tried to look away. "You are wearing perfume today, aren't you?" the palace woman asked. Her voice sounded familiar somehow. Then her graceful mouth began to twist. She was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. There was a savagery in the expression, as if a wild beast was eyeing its prey. Shin was struck speechless. "It has been a while, Lady Shin. I must apologize for my rudeness the last time I visited." Her face, with its generous whitening powder, carefully accented eyes and long eyebrows, drew closer. The showy accessories she wore distracted from the shape of her face, but it was round and young. And the way she stared, Shin remembered that look. She felt ice run through her veins. She knew from experience that this woman usually meant trouble. She had come to the crystal pavilion for the first time the year before. She cared for Lihua diligently. During that time, she also did several bold things that made half the women here unable to oppose her. Shin was not one of them, though. The woman had only returned recently and nearly ripped Shin's clothes off. She was not someone Shin wanted to spend much time with. The woman continued to stare at her, and Shin found herself backing up without meaning to. It was at that moment the doctor suddenly ran for the garden. The plump little man seemed to be trying to reach the storage shed. Shin attempted to follow him, but the unpleasant woman blocked her path. Shin pushed past her and tried to pursue the eunuch, but she was too late. He was holding the door's bar in his hand and stood there in mute amazement. A distinctive odor drifted from the entrance. It was the same way Lihua had once smelled, the reek of a sick person on her way to the next life. The other palace woman was rubbing her behind. Perhaps she had fallen on it when Shin shoved her, but she did not look particularly concerned. There was a slight furrow in her brow. She took the bundle from the eunuch. No longer whispering, she shouted, "Hot water! Boil some water right away, please." Then she rushed into the shed. The patient was resting on a crude bed, woven mats piled on top of each other. She was one of the laundry maids. "Yes, of course, miss," the eunuch said. He hurried off again, moving so quickly his chin jiggled. The palace woman gave the maid what looked like water. Then she turned to Shin. "Why is she in here, do you have to ask?" "We are isolating her so no one else gets sick. It is only common sense." The lady obviously wanted to say something back, but she restrained herself. Instead she said, "Indeed it is." However, the maid was coughing, but it did not sound normal. The visitor pressed a handkerchief to the maid's mouth as she coughed. When she took it away, it was speckled with red. True, this is an infectious disease. It is not highly communicable, but one thing is certain. If you continue to treat her like this, she will die. But what is one dead maid, eh? She moved away from the sick woman, about to go farther into the shed. Before she knew what she was doing, Shin tried to grab her by the shoulder, tried to stop her. But the intruder slipped easily out of her grasp. No, that's Shin tripped on a wicker box as she made another attempt to stop the woman, but now she was too late. The woman was picking up a small box. She said, "When I entered this room, it brought back memories." She continued, "Memories of when consort Lihua was ill." "What does that have to do with this?" she asked. "You were burning incense to try to disguise the odor." "Yes, but so what?" Shin reached out to take the box back. He noticed something similar when he came into the room, but it was the other way around this time. The woman opened the box to reveal a collection of small, colorful bottles. She seemed to be using the sick woman to disguise the aroma of these perfumes. She popped open one of the bottles and took an experimental sniff. The ladies of the Crystal Pavilion do like their secrets. And letting innocent eunuchs take the blame. The woman had opened a bottle of perfume oil. It had come with the caravan the other day. Most of it had been confiscated by the eunuchs. Each oil is only minimally toxic individually, but if you combine them, who knows? The woman said melodically. Her eyes narrowed as she smiled. Then the woman Maomao asked Shin a question. She said, "What exactly are you doing trying to make a drug to induce a miscarriage?" Now what to do, Maomao wondered as she wiped her face with a handkerchief. She hated the feeling of the whitening powder. The rouge just wouldn't come off. She would need to wash her hair later. She had styled it with perfume oil, so it needed a good, thorough wash. To disguise her relatively expressionless eyes, she had cut the ends of her hair short and then glued them near her eyes. She wore a longer skirt than usual, hiding high shoes that made her look taller than she was, but maybe that hadn't been necessary. After all, the ladies of the Crystal Pavilion had hardly even noticed her. Feeling a bit sullen, Maomao took off her elevated shoes. She also changed into a different outfit. The sick woman had coughed some phlegm onto her while Maomao was examining her. The disease was only mildly infectious, it is true, but she wasn't about to walk around in those clothes. She had asked for a new outfit for safety. They had to settle for a lady-in-waiting's outfit from the Crystal Pavilion, so it lacked something in practicality. More than anything, Maomao wanted a bath, but there was no chance of that. She gave up the idea. Finally, looking a little neater, she went into the room where everyone was waiting. The people gathered in the reception room all wore brooding looks. They were dressed in every kind of finery. When Maomao came in after removing her makeup, she felt distinctly out of place. Consort Lihua was there, as were Jinchi and Gaeshun. A slim woman with a classically beautiful face was also present. At a word from Lihua, the other ladies in waiting stepped back. The quack doctor seemed eager to stay with the group. However, he had other work to do, so he decided to give it priority. To be frank, having him there would not have been much help. The beautiful woman was Shin, Consort Lihua's chief lady-in-waiting. They were cousins, and Shin was a woman of distinguished blood herself. She had a proud streak, and to be fair, she was lovely enough to attract attention even in the rear palace. Her face even somewhat resembled that of Lihua, perhaps another sign of their familial connection. She was only a chief lady-in-waiting, but her social status could have qualified her for a position as high as middle consort. So was that why she was made chief lady-in-waiting? The consorts were not the only ones who might gain the emperor's affections. Cases existed where even lowly maids had fallen under the imperial gaze and become mothers of the country. These cases were not entirely absent from the annals. Why have just one beautiful flower in one spot when you could have a bouquet? If a lady-in-waiting became the emperor's bedmate, and that lady had a social background distinguished enough to be a consort herself, her rank would almost certainly be given to her immediately. So what does that mean for them? Maomao wondered. She did not know anything about Lihua's family background, but she could guess that feelings between her and Shin must be complex. It would make one feel secure indeed to forge a bond of trust that would transcend such conflicts. How lucky consort Jayukayo is.